Hey, Eric, good to see you. Thank you for joining the CEO podcast today.
Yeah, Ben, thanks for having me on.
Of course. So I always like to start with, your perspective. How did you build your perspective? What was your background? How did that shape your perspective? Let's rewind it a little bit. Bring us back
Okay.
to, how you got into tech, the different experiences you've had at big companies, small companies, and how
Sure.
that's kind of got you to your perspective today.
I'll try to give you the Cliff Notes version, and if I'm going too long, cut me off. So I started out of school. I had a computer science degree from Purdue University,
Mhm.
and started at IBM in 1988 in Washington, D.C. area, Rockville, Maryland. And I was on the nation's largest project for IBM, or not the nation's, IBM's largest project ever, to rebuild the air traffic control system for North America, for the United States. And spent 2 years on a massive project there, coding. And after 2 years of that, I'm an adventurous guy, and I said, I want to branch out and do something different. So I took a job at Johns Hopkins Hospital for a year up in Baltimore, and I was a team of one building the patient identification check-in system for the hospital, which was a really fantastic experience. They were using a product that I used from IBM at the time on the air traffic control project, and they were struggling with it. And they had a bunch of more senior engineers that were in their 40s and 50s that were struggling. And so I came in and did my system, and it worked really well. And then they had me train those guys over lunch, which was an interesting task to do, because I was 22 years old and trying to be humble, but I had to win them over a little bit to show them my methodology and basically the methods I learned on the project with IBM.
Mhm.
And then I get restless again. So just after about a year, I decided to go back to my hometown, Chicago, and get a job at IBM in sales. It's a funny story, because if you remember IBM in 1991, they had a hiring freeze. IBM was not looking good. So I got no's. This is back when you typed up your resume and mailed it, right? So this is pre-internet. And so I had a
Pre-fax, it sounds like.
no, maybe, but it was better to mail. So I had
Okay.
a fraternity brother who was doing well at IBM. He set me up with a few of the branch managers, and one here basically said, "Look, we have a project that's using the product that you're an expert in, called S&C Electric Company, and we're going to bring you in on what is called expense recovery." And basically, what it meant is we're going to bill you out, and they promised for 6 months, work on this project, and then we'll bring you into the sales. And that's what happened. So I bypassed all the training. I had no sales training, and threw me into the mix. And then this is right around client server and OS2, and I became a object-oriented visual programming specialist, and really successful, partnering up with a few folks selling to State Farm and Walgreens and Sears at the time, and Allstate, and go on and on. And then also in my spare time, I built a product for IBM, a service offering based on what I did with the product. And they ended up building a whole division out in Rochester, New York, because I did it at Kodak. And they made millions on it, and they gave me a 2% raise at the time, and a trip to New York. So then I'm like, well, okay, I'm going to make money in sales. Let's do that. And then in '94, as I was having my best year, around June, they said, well, we're going to change your commission plan, because they didn't tell me I'm making too much, but that basically was was what the reason was. So then I said, okay. I went to Cubs games for a month and realized this isn't good, healthy for me, because I'm going to become a full-time alcoholic if I do this. So I did something illegal in IBM terms. I moonlit with one of our customers, earned about 10 grand, bought the first generation Pentium PC from, I think it was, what was the company that had the boxes that looked like cows? It was that one from Iowa that competed with Dell. I'll come to me. And then I still have it. I wrote an email. It was called Profs at the time at IBM, a mainframe email to the two guys I was doing all the selling with. And I said, guys, I'm 27 years old. I really think IBM should be doing things this way. They're not going to do it this way. So I'm going to start a company. You guys are married and have kids. I'll be the first to go. I did a handshake deal, a third, something I would not, by the way, recommend to anyone to do ever. but that's how I did it. They didn't call it startup then; they just called me stupid. But I ended up in
the other S.
Yeah, I ended up in the Bay Area, October of '94. I quit IBM on a Friday and subcontracted back to IBM, a company called Compete Incorporated. I launched in '94, and being in the Bay Area from '94 to 2000 was a magical time, because just everything about the Bay Area was fantastic to me. All the free parties from Adobe and Macromedia and others, and I watched the whole internet movement explode, and I lamented the fact that I didn't go with my original plan, which was to build a software company for fantasy football, and which I think would have done well at that time. We did services on IBM software because it was safer. My other partners convinced me on the safer route. And we grew that company. It took a little while, and then in '99 we exploded and got to about 100 people, and then got acquired by a public company called Perficient in Austin, Texas, which was a high flyer. About to be. They spun out of really a Vignette, so services for Vignette, but we brought in all the IBM stuff, and then I spent 3 years at Perficient during the downturn, which was really kind of tough, because it was. I'm one of those stories. The stock was up here, and I was locked up for 2 years. So it went from $28 to 35 cents, 36 cents. So whatever wealth that I thought I had, I didn't, but I still, and we got cash out of the deal, more than I ever thought I'd make in my life. And then I quit and took 4 years off and did other things. It was only supposed to be 6 months. And my wife had a dream to build a women's clothing store, so I helped her with that. Instead of 6 months, it became 4 years. So I spent 4 years going back and forth to LA and New York buying women's clothing, which was fantastic, by the way. You get to go to the parties and do all that stuff. And because I did 4 years, because Perficient stock ended up starting to do well after I left, and I held on to all my shares. And I was able to sell those, and I got into venture cap. It's a longer story. I did improv in Austin. I did a couple short films. I did a nonprofit. And then, ironically, IBM in 2007, friends of mine that I vacationed with in Cancun, asked me to do another startup to support their newer version of the same product. And that's how Clearblade started its life. It was me basically saying, let's go do another services deal.
Wow. Okay. So you've seen quite a bit. It sounds like, and you've also had different experiences. I think it's always great to have these different experiences, like you said. Being in the clothing business, improv, services, product. It sounds like you kind of talked about this earlier on. Like you were kind of restless. Like you wanted to kind of learn. And I think a lot of the entrepreneurs that I know is they have that restlessness in them, that they're constantly curious, constantly looking to learn, constantly looking for opportunities, or just trying to learn, and then it turns into an opportunity, right?
That's exactly.
It becomes serendipitous, right?
It's a journey of just what can you do in this life, and I really found out that I enjoyed building teams. I enjoyed leading. I'll be honest, I wasn't the most confident leader before. I was good technically. And so I brought in people to kind of run the other company. I was CTO, and then this next time around, I said, okay, I'm gonna take the CEO role, and we're gonna build this great services company around something called enterprise modernization. So for the first 5 years of Clearblade's life, we were going into IBM projects to reconfigure, really transform old code built in legacy 4GL systems into more modern Java stuff, very, very complex things using very complex tooling from IBM and other partners. And we built a 35-person team, and it was a grind because the IBM that I was working with wasn't the same as the IBM I worked with before. My friends in the lab were still my good friends, but the culture had changed, and the projects were hard. They didn't use us to scope, they used us to deliver. And then when their scoping was completely off, they would point to us and say, well, you got to get things done faster. And I said, I'll give you my estimate, but this is what it is. And then there was a lightning event, And ironically, I was in San Francisco at the time. I was living in Austin. I was there for my friend from IBM's 50th birthday. And we had transitioned more from doing mainframe type stuff to mobile stuff because that was the wave. And we were really interested in pulling code and data off the phone and putting it into the cloud, right? So there used to be a small segment in the market called mobile backend as a service.
Yeah.
So we were MBAS. So we were an MBAS company competing with Kinvey and Kaizen and Kony and others. And IBM had jumped into the mobile space by buying a company called Worklight. So this is a funny story. So I recruited, or a guy came to me from IBM, fantastic guy. He's basically my co-founder here because we changed the entire company, Aaron Alsbrook. And Aaron was on a project for Liberty Mutual Insurance. So, you know, the ostrich commercials and the app. We helped Liberty Mutual build that app on IBM's product. And we were a reseller. And I called Aaron one day and I said, hey, can you give me all the highlights of why Worklight's a good product to use so we can sell it into the market and get more business? And then Aaron, who's a calm guy and who rarely swears, just lit me up with a stream of expletives on how bad it was. And I'm like, oh no, what do we do now? And so I'm in San Francisco, and we started experimenting and using a different product at USAA Insurance called Parse. I don't know if you remember the company Parse, Bay Area company. They were kind of one of the leaders in mobile backend. Well, I wake up on a Friday morning, I think it was April 26th, so we're into 2013. I see news that they got bought before for $85 million by Facebook. And I called friends of mine in the Austin area that knew more about Parse. I said, how much revenue did they have? And it was under 2 million. And so the venture cap side of me said, we got to jump into this space. So I immediately called Aaron in a panic and just said, which is what I do. And he's learned to survive those lightning bolt moments. And I said, Aaron, tell me all the things you hate about Worklight again. And he did. And I said, tell me all the things you really like about what Parse is doing. And he did. And I said, well, they just got bought. So we should go build this for large enterprises because Parse is out of the market now. Facebook will internalize it and use it for their mobile because they were struggling at the time with mobile, if you remember. And I said, let's build something that it scales to millions of devices. Let's build something that knows how to integrate with enterprise systems. Let's build something that's secure from the ground up. And let's build something that is extremely fast, like just reduce latency, just crazy, and a bunch of other things. And he, on the phone call, he said, you're absolutely insane. And I said, I may be. I said, but I want you to think about it. And then we continued to debate it for a few months. And then one day, he was in Raleigh at the time, which made it easier. So he didn't have to suffer me every day. And he slipped and said, I think I can build this. And I said, done. I said, go, train the team on developing all this, and then I'll go raise money. And he said, Eric, you can't take our existing 35-person team and train them. They're consultants, not hardcore software developers. So you've got to go reconfigure the whole thing. And so I went, and these are mostly friends of mine, people I've worked with. So I spent a year raising money and finding homes for these folks with other services folks that I knew. And we ramped the company down to like 5 people and started building. That's a long story of how we survived 2013. And then we launched our first products in 2014. The other parameter I gave Aaron is I want to build for the cloud and I want to build for the client, so the edge. So we went in with edge computing in mind in 2013 to make sure it ran in both places. And I think that's one of our unique value props, which I'll get to later. And then we launched the first cloud and edge products in 2014. And funny story, my first client was Zach Dell. So Michael Dell's youngest son was building a mobile app for dating called Thread. He was a senior in high school, and so he was doing his startup, and they were launching at the University of Texas in a big sorority fraternity party. And so we built with our software all the backend to support that mobile app. And I've got pictures of my team watching all the servers and handling as the party's going on, and pictures from Zach Dell of all the good-looking sorority girls and fraternity guys partying and watching all the messages go back and forth, right? So that was our very first customer, and that's kind of what started us on the path to Internet of Things, because Aaron was smart enough to build it not just for mobile devices, but he said, I want to build this for every single device that wants to communicate with the internet.
All right, let's talk about the Internet of Things. I think that's a good segue. But before we get there, how did you get your first customer to be Zach Dell? And did he build it with you in Michael's garage? That's
that's
what our audience wants to know. So, or did he have his own garage?
Yeah. So there's an incubator in Austin, it's probably well known now, Capital Factory. So I knew Josh Baer really well, who founded Capital Factory. In fact, he asked me to be part of that in the beginning. And I'm like, no, I've got my own thing I'm doing. And I met Zach. I actually met the guys that had the idea that came from the University of Michigan. And they had convinced Zach Dell to join and invest. And that's how it got started. So they brought their idea and they needed help developing that idea. A guy named Lander Coronado, good guy. And I convinced Lander, look, don't go try to build this from the ground up. We've got software that can help you do it quickly. We'll hire a design firm to do all the UI on the phone, but we'll do all the back end stuff. And it worked, and it worked great. And it was a great first client to have, and it really got us started.
Nice. Okay. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about the Internet of Things. That was kind of the time when everyone was saying cloud was going to change the world, and that was going to enable the Internet of Things. So, well, you probably had worked on projects similar to that in the past on the services side. You thought that was going to be a big thing. Why did it take so long to be a big thing? Or is it a big thing? It's just, customers have a lot of legacy and they may or may not want to modernize, and, it might be working the way they want it. Because, so manufacturing companies have been around for a long time. Real companies have been around for a long time. So they've been technically doing the Internet of Things just in a different way, right? So walk us through kind of the evolution of Internet of Things from your perspective as you look at the customers and their perspective on why or why not they need to change, right?
So we were super early, and we, Aaron and team had learned from IBM, of all things, about this protocol called MQTT, and we jumped in and built, our broker from the ground up, alongside a company called Telemetry and some others. We'd all go to the Interrupt days in the Bay Area and make sure that we're performing to the spec. And there's a company, Telemetry got bought by Amazon in 2015, and that's what launched them into the Internet of Things. But what we saw, and this is what's interesting, I kept hammering the engineering team. I said, I want this to be so fast. I want it to be the new version of what WebSphere was for IBM in the 90s when the internet took off. But I said, I want you to take out all the latency in the messaging. And the problem that we saw way back then was if you use cloud services, right? And I did not want to, because I said, I want to build our own IP. I do not want to use someone else's IP. And I said, but the problem is when you do things in a microservices way, not that microservice is bad, but when you're building something that needs to be as resilient and high performant as IoT, it costs you something every time you move in and out of different services. So you've got a security service, you've got message for all this stuff, right? And so the engineering team did something completely unique in the industry and still is today. They basically built everything in to a single binary. So we built in the message broker, the code execution engine, part of the database stuff, obviously the database is separate, security, all of it in one single binary, and got it down to 40 megabytes. So it was akin to an operating system and still is. So we went a completely different path from the rest of the industry, because the conventional wisdom, and we looked at what GE was doing with Predix and what IBM was doing with Bluemix, and they were failing miserably at this approach. And when Amazon jumped in, it scared us. And I remember Aaron rushing in my office, oh no, Amazon now is going after the Internet of Things. They said, all right, that's okay. We're going to continue to do things our way, and we're either going to be right or we're going to be wrong, but we're going to continue to stay different and take our approach. And so we built this open system, open API system, so the customer could move data into anywhere they want. But we also just said, all we're going to require is Linux. So you can put it on whatever cloud you want. You could put it on a server on-prem, and you can run it at the edge. So we took a very different approach, and I can't tell you how many times we tried to explain it to the analysts and so forth, and they all said, you're doing it wrong. And this is one thing I learned from the last company, which is stick to your guns if you really believe you're right. I used to joke I was going to write a book someday called Bloated Startup, the opposite of Lean Startup, because we followed nothing in that book. We didn't do MVP. We didn't do, let's test the market. We just said, we believe we're right, and we're going to prove it over time. Mm-hmm. And little did we know that we were so early, it almost killed us, right? We were so early in the market and I knew this would happen. I said, here's the problem. Internet of Things, everybody's going to jump in because everybody uses the internet and everybody has things. And the next thing we knew, there were 400 plus lookalikes of Clearblade. And there was no way for us to rise above that noise with our small company. So we just stuck our nose to the ground and said, let's keep building. Let's get out of the services business, which is interesting because I'll bring that back. We completely got rid of all the services we did and just lived by product alone, which helped us build better and better product. And some of our first customers were enterprise customers. Our next customer after Zagdell was a company in Copenhagen that, if you know what an AS400 is, they ran AS400s for home vacation rentals like Airbnb. But they'd been doing it since the 40s with catalogs, right? So they did this in that part of the world a lot. And they hired us because they had no idea how to create a mobile app to leverage all their legacy stuff. So we built, it's a company called Dan Center. We built their initial mobile app to get into that space and tied it all back to their AS400 database and code to make it all work. And that was one of our unique propositions was we know legacy, really hardcore stuff, and we can make them work with this new stuff on the client side. So that was a watershed moment. And then we got into companies like Stanley Black & Decker. And the biggest one, Stanley was good, but it didn't succeed, not because of us, but just because of company politics and what they were trying to build. And they didn't really have a vision of what they wanted to build. But at BNSF Rail, this is a funny story. We get a meeting with them up in Fort Worth, and we drive up, Aaron and I, and we do a demo. So I actually built the demo at the time. So I was hands-on keyboard, and we built the demo on what is called positive train control. So how you manage trains and make sure that they are safe and speeds and feeds and all this stuff. I did this long demo with like mocked up videos and looking at speed of the train and so forth. And they sat and listened. It was a 20-person group. And then after the thing was over, they said, guys, you seem like smart guys and really know what you're talking about. And they opened the curtain on their command center. We happened to be right above it. And they said, but we built all this stuff. I'm like, oh. And I'm thinking, well, why are we here? And they said, we'll call you. We'll call you back if we need something. And so driving back, Aaron's like, oh, I thought that meeting went really well. And I said, I don't think we'll ever hear from them again. And then a month later, they call us back. And they said, we want you to come up. And I'm like, okay. And so Aaron is a guy that prepares, that wants to have everything set up. This is why we're kind of good yin and yang. I'm a guy that shoots from the hip and says, let's just go. And he's like, so what are we going to prepare? What are we going to do? I said, absolutely nothing, because we have no idea why we're being called back. And then we go up there and they said, you guys, they were great. They said, you guys know why you're back? And I said, I have no idea. He goes, well, you're smart guys. You seem to know a lot about this stuff. You seem to have built some interesting software. Here's our problem. We've got a mandate to monitor all of our railroad crossings for weather events and for operational use as opposed to rolling trucks. And we also have to get off of 2G and 3G cellular communications. Right. And the companies we work with today, the Alstoms and Siemens and Hitachis of the world, I don't know which one, but they said one of them that we do a lot of business with, are forcing us to buy this new expensive piece of hardware with their software embedded on it, and the price is outrageous. And we're BNSF. We don't like that. So we want to create our own. And so we want you to use your edge computing, and we're going to ship you the Wisdom box and the Dow box. These are rail stuff they sit in bungalows next to these crossings. And we're going to teach you what protocols we use, SNMP and others. And we want you to transmit that from your edge software on these devices to our back office all on-prem. And so we gave them a number on a pilot. We got the equipment, we did the pilot, we got it all to work, and BNSF ended up being our first big rollout of edge compute and Clearblade over, mostly all of Texas, really in the Gulf too for hurricanes and so forth. And they became our first real big enterprise customer and still are a big customer of ours today.
What year was that, Eric?
2016.
2016. Okay. Would you say they were? Well, you said that if customers have a vision, they can execute this. So it sounded like that customer had a vision.
They had a vision.
It sounded like they probably had tried some things that may not have worked out, so they knew what they were doing.
Yep.
That was still kind of early days.
Very
again,
early
like
days.
you said, everyone was pitching IoT. Cisco, who had a great position, Amazon, like everyone was pitching it. So if you kind of go, fast forward to today, where are we now in the IoT space? Like, are we any more farther along in customer maturity or vision or wanting to be more mature than we were?
So vision and customer maturity, yes, but we're still in this, what I call the wild, wild west of IoT in terms of how we approach the build. So what the clouds basically are selling are the same parts that they were selling back in 2015, 2016. And they're saying, here are all the tools to go build IoT. Well, the reason why IoT has struggled for the last 10 years is it's all services and very little product. And it continues today. So the marketing messaging, and I'll just say it from Microsoft and Amazon, not that you can't build a robust system with those products. You can't build a system that is efficient at scale for millions of devices. So it works for a few thousand or even 100,000, but as you get higher and higher, you've got to rebuild, you've got to reconfigure, and all that money is going to the services companies, the big SIs. And people are trained that that's what it is. And in my view, no, it's not. You've got to have purpose-built software that a company like Clearblade focuses on every day, every minute of every day, improving security, improving performance, adding features, integrating AI, all of this stuff. And when you're doing custom build, I mean, the data shows it, that 80% of these projects fail at scale because you're constantly building. It's really good business for the system integrators because they get to keep their people billing and billing and billing. But my gosh, the times that we've gone in and cleaned up an AWS mess or a Microsoft mess, not because that those parts don't work, but because you need the very best engineers in the world to build this every time. And even if they're the best, you're building with the wrong raw materials because you still have that latency problem, you still have that maintenance problem, and you're stuck with this ongoing maintenance cost for years and years and years. And the industry's always shifting. So our approach has always been, let's build product. And we kind of made the same mistakes everyone else did early on, is we built product for building as well. And our very first, so BNS was our first big enterprise customer, but the one that's really gone far with us and is really stuck is Rheem. So it's funny, the executive that brought us in to Stanley Black & Decker did a 9-month study and bake-off between us and Microsoft and Ayla Networks and some of the other popular ones at the time. And he did a scorecard, and he went to his management and said, based on the scorecard, there's one company that stands out, and it's Clearblade. And so my meeting with Rheem was with this executive. I remember sitting in the boardroom, and he said, you guys crushed everybody else in terms of product capability. He says, but you're by far the smallest company that we're reviewing. So how are you going to support us? And I just looked at him and said, pay us enough and we'll support you well enough. And that's what they did. And Rheem is our biggest customer still today. We have a very, very good partnership with Rheem, and they've got a very complex set of parameters where they're streaming massive amounts of data from hundreds of thousands of water heaters around the world, and it's a massive workload problem. And so they actually helped us improve our product. But what we learned from that engagement is we've got to get out of the tool selling business and get into the product business. So when COVID hit, and that was another challenge, right? And we're looking at our customer list, we're looking at things. We had $1 million projects that got delayed or canceled. And I just went to the team and said, let's take a different approach. Let's focus on product, and let's take a look at what's slowing Rheem down, what's slowing BNSF down, what's slowing, we had a project called American Dream out in New Jersey, what's slowing that big mall project down. And what we came out with was, well, everyone is still building custom UI, custom stuff on top of our tooling, and then we said, what if we built the application, like built something that can handle any asset, any area, and allows not the developer, or you don't need a developer to build it. You can use an operator to actually configure it without having to drop into heavy code. And that's what was the birth of our product called Intelligent Assets.
So if we kind of look at the market, to your point, like there's a lot of companies that provide the tools to build, right?
Yes.
And I think that's the same across many different markets, right? When it comes to data, modernizing data technology, like that's how Snowflake, I think, really was able to creep up and beat the incumbents on that, because their stuff was just easy to use. You didn't need a super sophisticated, unicorn engineer to build a platform that would require millions of dollars in software and millions of dollars in services, right?
Right.
And so, I think there's been a huge shift in the last, 5 to 6 years on ease of use and time to value. So I think executives, to your point on the customer side, they are tired of waiting. Let's go do this thing. Let's go do it now. Let's get some results, and then let's kind of accelerate, right? Instead of waiting 3 years to do a big IBM project, for example, like you probably did, but that, the technology wasn't ready. So maybe talk a little bit about some of the ways you see customers struggling to kind of get things off the ground, what your recommendation is to them to, do something that's a little faster, maybe smaller. And also what are some of the problems that have been solved, and what are the problems that haven't been solved? And every problem has not been solved, and every technology is not going to solve the problem. So maybe walk us through kind of how you see customers trying to solve the problem, and how they can do it in an effective way that keeps the ball rolling and doesn't require them to keep churning out dollars to just maybe have a successful project.
So the mistakes I'm seeing today are the same ones we've been making for the last 10 years. It's still a lot of custom build. It's still, I think there's the industry seems to have accepted the fact that you need to spend millions and millions of dollars over several years to get to a basic level of functionality. And that's one of the problems with the industry, is they're willing to spend services dollars, but they're very unwilling to spend OpEx dollars for a product that will get you there in 1/10 of the time, right? And everybody's focused almost exclusively on the visuals, right? On the UI. And most consulting companies lead with fancy design, right? But because you don't see the back end, right? So they get the projects, and then the projects start out as an estimate here, then it goes here, it's delay. Whether it's an outside company or the internal teams that they've hired to go do this. So one of the things that we see is we get a lot of pushback because we were dealing with engineers selling to engineers, right? And the engineers are protecting their jobs and their turf because they're afraid of bringing in purpose-built software. They said, wait a minute, that's one. I want to attack this problem because it's a fun problem to go after. We've been working on it for years and we're almost there. The problem with that is when you think you're almost there, there's another mountain on as you get to the next peak, and there's another one, and there's another one. And everybody has underestimated the complexity of IoT. And the cloud companies are really good at building cloud functionality. IoT is a different animal. You can't build IoT like a cloud. And you've seen it happen. You've seen IBM get out of the IoT business. You've seen Google get out of the IoT business. And now the market has shrunk. You saw this 400 plus companies. Now they're down to service companies, and they sell what I would call serviceware or frameworks, and they do repeatable builds, but they're not selling product. And when you now look at the IoT space, there's very few companies that are dedicated to IoT software. And a lot of them have been bounced around, acquired by, a software AG and then spun out again, because I look at PTC and ThingWorks, they're getting acquired. They're not, I mean, it's because it's so hard and the revenue isn't there for these bigger companies. So it's easy just to say, let's get rid of that low performer and let's focus on what's making us money, which is data ingestion and databases and AI, right? Mm-hmm. So there still has to be someone to solve this problem. And we're fighting upstream too with other analysts that say, no, this is the right way to do it. It's the upper right-hand quadrant, and Microsoft and AWS is the leader. And we're saying, well, look at your cost of build, look at the total cost of ownership and time to build, and we can cut that down and prove it to you in a month. And we've had recent customers that we've just signed where now we're bringing back services, because we always said we don't want to be a service company. So we're going to work with SoftServe or EPAM or whoever, and they're going to see how great Clearblade is and they're going to use it. Because they see it as, well, that's money we should get by building. So I don't want to use Clearblade. I want to build on Amazon and Microsoft. And then you're also going up against, hey, we're going to do a big cloud consumption deal with you. We're going to give you all this stuff and you're going to use our stuff, right? Well, now what I see in the market is there's a ton of pent up frustration by the executives on why haven't we been able to deliver on this for the last 10 years? And we built up a small services team of, seriously, my services team is 5 people right now. Or we want to get it to about 15 or 20, but we're not going to become a services company. But the Marines that go in and said, we're going to show you our product and give us a month and let's show you what we can do with our product, and let's customize our product for your specific use case. But we're going to use the same product at BNSF, at Rheem, at Boeing, at CN, at Chicago Metro that we've used the entire time. And we've taken all the advice and input from those customers and continued to improve product for all these use cases. So we're going against the common conventional wisdom, which says you need to build verticalized solutions for these markets. And we even started to dabble with that in the building space and the rail space. And then we said, you know what? No, we're going to stick with our horizontal approach, and we're going to go in and prove it with our services folks that in 1 month or 2 months, whatever the pilot is, we're going to wow them so much that they're going to then start standardizing on Clearblade. And this is the tipping point that I've seen really since Google pulled out of the market, because I've written blogs about this for years and say, hey, you're building on shifting sands, folks, because these companies, their business is in IoT, their business is bigger than that, and they're going to deprecate parts of their product or all of their product, and you're going to go have to rebuild everything again. And that's happened over and over. We took over Google's IoT Core, and we were one of 10 or so companies that were tapped to do it. We took 80-90% of that business because we had product where everyone else had services. So it is shifting, and our message now is we can go prove it to you, and we can start to attack that pent up frustration that the executives have not being able to deliver on their vision of what they want to do.
Well, agreed. And this kind of goes back to my question, right? Back in 2014 was IoT. We're still, I'm going to say, in the same kind of place, and so we haven't really evolved much. I think customers have learned a lot. I think they have an appetite for maturing, but I think they want to see results, to your point.
Yeah.
So,
exactly that.
I think IoT in a way has almost been rebranded as Edge. Love to hear your perspective on that. Because now you can buy something for Edge. You don't need that IoT thing anymore. That didn't work. That. So kind of walk us through what you're seeing.
That's a great question.
On Edge, and we work with a lot of different companies in the space. So I'm going to say demystify Edge for us.
Okay, sure.
From your perspective.
So Edge is obviously all about running on the machine or next to the machine, doing things efficiently. And I've always said this. I said, look, it's protocol translation's easy, right? Everyone's selling, oh, we can convert from CAN bus to Modbus, and then that's we give that away for free. You know, I think that the PTC company that they bought, they charge per connector. That's dead, in my opinion. What I'm seeing Edge go through, and the killer app for Edge is AI. And I've said this for years. They're going to want to put traditional AI at the edge to do all your inferencing right there. So we built that in for one of our customers several years ago, not BNSF, Baker Hughes. So Baker Hughes, this is a fantastic story. They did a bake-off in 21. Again, similar players, except it was us, Foghorn Systems at the time, Litmus, and others. And they chose us again because of capability. But then they challenged us. They said, look, Clearblade, we've got 38 models that run in Houston for oil and gas. We want you to take these 38 models and prove to us, and they've been written over 30 years in all various different, they're created all different types of tools. We want you to prove you can run these 38 models in your software at the edge. And we proved it because we subscribe to a common standard called ONNX, and we honor that standard. And so when you export a model that honors that standard, it runs. Doesn't have to be a GPU either. It's a x86 ruggedized box that sits at the site that runs localized AI. Because if you're in the middle of Saudi Arabia, there's two problems you have. One, satellite transmission. You can't get all the data fast enough to Houston. It's too expensive and it's too much data. So they end up using a fraction of that data, and the model's not as effective. And two, these companies don't want their data leaving certain areas. Like they don't want it to leave Saudi Arabia. They want the data to stay there. So that was, and we didn't build anything. We basically sold Baker Hughes product, and then they used it and built it into their oil and gas iTrack drilling product. So companies don't even know Clearblade's involved, but we're OEM'd into something else, right? And Edge, what I see in the market today is everyone's talking about containerization and movement of, again, custom build apps. And here we go again. You nailed it. It's the same exact problem. We're providing an application and a runtime at the edge that can run either connected or disconnected, that will continue to do the inferencing, that will continue to get the data, that will store that data into as much storage as you have at the edge, and until it connects. And we solved this problem many years ago at BNSF. So what I see in Edge is it's 3 to 4 years behind the general IoT curve, right? And so now Edge is all the rage, and I think it should be, because we're going to do things like that. But I see the companies that are mostly executing in Edge as container movement, so they're moving other people's custom builds around, or they're embedded what I call point solutions that Alstom or Cisco or Hitachi are delivering for a specific thing. One of the reasons the rails like us is because they can use us to monitor crossings or any piece of equipment that they choose to. It's not a purpose-built vertical single thing app. It's not firmware that does one thing well. It's software that does everything well and can be configured by operators. You don't need a degree in computer science to go in and change the device or the device twin, the digital twin, to get the data that you want. So the struggling part for us is, what are you? Are you an IoT company? Are you a digital twin company? Are you an edge company? And our answer is yes. So how do you market yourself? That's the tricky thing, is because everyone wants to put you in their box. And then a lot of times they want to compare you to other people's boxes like Amazon and Microsoft. And you go and say, we're nothing like that. Oh, well, you're closed. No, we're open API everything. We let you move everything around. We standardize everything. So that's the challenge, is rising above that noise. And we've got 200 plus customers around the world. And a lot of those came from Google when we took over IoT Core, but IoT Core is really just a subset of what you really need. So they're doing basic messaging with IoT Core and still doing custom build around it. And so our job is to reach out to those customers and say, hey, if you're struggling with your IoT projects, think of upgrading from IoT Core to IoT Core Plus or Intelligent Assets, and we'll get you there quicker.
Mm-hmm. So I guess what I hear you saying is the edges sounds like the same thing all over again.
Same thing.
It's a little different because it's not embedded in my watch. It's embedded in some type of infrastructure that's connected to my watch or my device. So I guess as customers think about edge and they think about AI, and you think about custom build and bespoke things, why does it not need to be custom or bespoke?
So if you have software that is built to handle all of the super hard stuff, right? How do you handle millions of devices? How do you handle security? How do you handle certificates? How do you handle AI at the edge? How do you move workload between centralized and distributed? We did all this even before Kubernetes was big, and now we bought into Kubernetes, but we also do bare metal. When you have all that built, and then you give the customer the application, because here's the application that allows you to get any piece of data from any piece of physical equipment and create your version of a digital twin. Also an overloaded term because digital twin's been around forever, but most people's definition of digital twin is I'm now going to model like a GE engine that's not connected real time to its actual counterpart. We're doing, wind testing and so forth. No, these are connected digital twins that are only feeding you the data that you want from that digital twin, because you want to say, I want these things, but I don't need to know that it's the tensile strength of the steel around the thing. I need these pieces of data. We give the operators the ability to define what they want, to define rules around that twin, to incorporate AI all within our application. But we give you the ability to customize the application to your liking, to what you need. And then everyone gets hung up. Well, I want my specific dashboard to look like this. So what we've done is say, okay, we've now enabled our product to then have basically what we call plugins or components. So you can do your custom dashboards and you can build those. You can have another system integrator build those, but you tie into the same product that services all of this information and handles all the latency, handles all the security, handles what happens when you have to connect several 100,000 devices at once and they're all rushing into the system. So one of the things the Google stuff really helped us with was we were then tasked with having to deploy Clearblade in Asia, in Europe, and in North America, and we didn't know what each customer was doing at their edge, right? They didn't have our edge. So then we had to deal with all sorts of crazy firmware that did things. Let's just say they were friendly like DDoS attacks. They were just trying to reconnect and flooding our system. We had to then go figure out, how do we manage all this? How do we deal with blue-green updates as we push out new releases and do that in a SaaS-like way? That's a very different motion than building a custom app for the edge or for the cloud, because you're trying to solve one specific use case, but you haven't dealt with all the things that we've dealt with over the years to handle that. And so as you get bigger, you end up saying, oh, I've got to refactor this. I've got to rebuild it. And with us, you can start in the cloud alone, and then you can add edge compute as you need to, and it services the same application everywhere. So it's a very different way of thinking about IoT and edge compute. And what we've struggled with is it takes convincing. And finally, beginning of this year, I just said, look, let's stop trying to convince people with slides and fancy spreadsheets. Let's go in and show them. Let's go in for that month and prove it to them. And I mentioned it before, we've got a couple, 2, 3 big clients that after a month, they sit back and go, are you kidding me? We've been trying to do this for 2 years and you did it in a month. So yes, you're going to go get this next project, and yes, we're going to standardize on Clearblade.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hear that from a lot of CEOs. I think CEOs of tech companies are saying, hey, I don't want to go through a long sales process. I don't want the customer to have to go through a long sales process. I just want to get it in their hands. And I talked to CEO of a data company the other day, specifically on AI. And he's like, we built this thing so that when we do a demo, the customer can actually interact with it directly. Or I built this thing and they can actually start using it right now.
Yep.
Like, because if you go through, the typical marketing sales process and the customer goes through the typical buying process, it just takes a long time and it's a lot of effort, and you could be using that time to do other things.
Exactly.
I'm starting to see a trend.
Yeah.
I'm starting to see a trend here. I don't know, maybe you guys are part of this, but like, you need to have your go-to-market motion, you need to have your sales team, but like you got to have some vision on the other side of the table.
Yeah.
And if they don't have the vision, you need to help them with the vision, and then help them actually start to move it forward. Because just waiting for people to say, I got budget now and I'm coming up with my strategy, come in next year, like that's a dead deal, both on the customer side and the vendor side. The customer's not moving, and it's challenging. Right?
And what we want to do is kind of avoid that customer going through that 1, 2, 3 year pain, because that's what's happened in the past. Is they don't buy in, and then they go off and they spend 2, 3 years and they burn a lot of money, and then they eventually come back and say, all right, we're ready to listen now. So so that's kind of the uphill battle that we've been fighting, but I'm seeing a shift because there's so much frustration out there that they say, look, we can spend 25K, 50K to give these guys a shot. And once we basically show them what the product can do, all the other objections kind of melt away, because the art of the possible is there. Look, we can give you those custom dashboards, or you can build those custom dashboards. But if you work within the framework of a product that we've now been working on for 6+ years, with input from Boeing, with input from BNSF, with input from all these customers, and we're continuing to add features that are common across all customers, that's the holy grail. And now that I only need to be hit on the head about 40 times to actually see the light, which is we can't beat the big SIs head to head like Deloitte and Accenture and EY that have these big cloud partnerships. So we got to beat them at their own game by going in with a small team and said, we're going to deliver something that you've been working on for 5 years. We'll deliver it in a few months. And when we prove it, then it's game on. So getting that message. So one of the things I wish I was smarter at, and we're a very engineering-led company, if that doesn't come through, because I'm a computer science major as well, is I would have spent more on marketing. I would have spent more on how do we describe this. I would have got back in the services game earlier to go prove it, as opposed to just keep talking and trying to convince people with technical diagrams. You got to talk to the executives, and you've got to make them a promise. We can show you this quickly, and if we fail, here's your money back, right? Or and if you go forward, we'll credit it to the next big project because you gave us the chance to show you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, all right. Well, that's a good way to end it, Eric. I think this is great. Thank you for sharing your perspective. Great. We got to talk about some of the hot and not things like IoT and edge. And appreciate your coming on the podcast, and best of luck with working with customers as they go on their edge journey until we turn it into some other term.
Well, thanks. Well, one, I appreciate your insight and the fact that you folks do deep dive, real analysis on product, regardless of company size. And I think that's an important piece that's missing in the industry. And I think you folks do a very good job at that.
Cool. Thank you, Eric, for the plug. Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
All right. I'll see you soon.